Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a truly fascinating and honestly a highly contrarian essay titled An Ode to Utopia by Sufeng. Now, most of us have been taught to view the whole concept of a utopia with some deep skepticism, right? Maybe even a bit of cynicism. We tend to see it as a naive fantasy, or worse, a dangerous trap. But this essay, it completely flips that script. It challenges our modern assumptions and actually asks us to reconsider the real value of striving for an absolute ideal. So let's dive right in and see exactly how the author builds this really provocative argument.
Okay, the essay doesn't ease you in, it hits you right up front with this incredibly striking metaphor. He writes, "A person without a longing for utopia is akin to a rat living in a gutter. A nation without a group of people pursuing utopia is a soulless species." Wow. The author is establishing the core premise immediately here. Dreaming of a perfect society isn't just some nice-to-have luxury, it's fundamentally essential to the human spirit. Without it, the essay argues, we literally lose our soul and our drive for genuine elevation.
All right, let's get into part one, reframing dystopian failures. Right off the bat, you really can't talk about utopia without addressing the massive elephant in the room, historical attempts that have notoriously crashed and burned. The essay directly confronts these, pointing specifically to Robert Owen's famous 19th century New Harmony community. But instead of just accepting this collapse as ironclad proof that utopia is impossible, the author poses a crucial rhetorical question. Does failure mean the pursuit of an ideal society is actually erroneous? Well, Sufeng's perspective is a resounding no. In fact, he argues that abandoning this pursuit out of fear of failure reduces us to mere, quote, walking corpses. Now, what's super interesting here is how the author tackles pop culture. Think about massive books like 1984, Brave New World, Animal Farm, The Handmaid's Tale, and Lord of the Flies. We've all read them, or at least we know the gist of them, right? The essay acknowledges that these best-selling anti-utopian books have profoundly conditioned our modern mindset. Basically, they've trained us to despise the utopian ideal by showing us these utterly terrifying visions of what happens when society tries to engineer perfection. But here is a massive reframe, and honestly, this brilliantly illustrates the essay's contrarian approach. The conventional view looks at those dystopian novels and says, see? Trying to build utopia is bad and it's dangerous. But Sufeng argues the exact opposite. He suggests these books are actually essential roadmaps. They aren't reasons to abandon the dream, they're detailed guides clarifying exactly what should not exist in an ideal society. The author believes these anti-utopian thinkers have actually paved the way for a true utopia, just by showing us all the pitfalls. Building on that, the author then groups the major arguments against utopia into three, what he calls ironclad proofs used by critics. First, historical utopian failures. Second, the warnings of anti-utopian fiction we just talked about. And third, the totalitarian drawbacks seen in places like North Korea, the Soviet Union, and China. Obviously, these are highly charged historical examples. But instead of viewing these as the final nails in utopia's coffin, Sufeng flips the narrative entirely. He claims these real-world case studies provide the exact reference material and data we need to actually create a truly ideal society. Moving right along to part two, critiquing the modern consensus. So, having vigorously defended the pursuit of utopia, the author then aggressively pivots to critique the modern systems we currently live in and actively strive to perfect. The essay identifies three major pillars we generally consider the absolute pinnacle of human organization: an open free market economy, the inviolability of private property, and a one-person, one-vote democratic system. Now, Sufeng does concede a very important point here, acknowledging that these pursuits currently bring prosperity, freedom, and liberate productivity way better than past systems. But, and it's a big but, the essay argues they are still far from the ideal environment for humanity. Let's break down how this builds into the author's specific critiques, starting with the free market. The essay uses a highly visual metaphor, comparing the open free market economy directly to an open African savanna. Just think about that for a second. Out in the savanna, animals forage and reproduce freely, sure, but it is fundamentally a brutal game of survival of the fittest. So the author prompts us to ask, is this animalistic survival environment of a jungle really the ideal living state for humans? Are we meant to just constantly compete for survival, or is there a higher, more harmonious way for us to exist? Next up, the essay targets private property. While agreeing that wealth obtained through actual hard work and wisdom should be protected, the critique really centers on a messy reality. The essay asks some pretty tough questions here. how do we actually truly determine if wealth was obtained legitimately? Does absolute private property just end up protecting illegally or unethically obtained wealth? And crucially, under this current system, is the whole idea of the poorest citizens counterattacking to become middle class mostly just a myth? Finally, the author tackles the one-person, one-vote democratic system. While acknowledging it as a good measure historically, Zufeng argues it has a fatal flaw. According to the essay, relying on a popular vote inherently requires candidates to cater to the vulgar wishes of the general public. The author claims the system ultimately elevates mediocre individuals who simply pursue political correctness just to get elected, which makes it incredibly difficult for a genuinely visionary sage or a truly exceptional leader to ever take charge. Which brings us to part 3, the 8 insoluble problems. To really stress test these modern systems, the essay points to the United States, citing it as having the most perfect democratic system on the planet today. Yet the author argues that if we completely eliminate utopian thoughts and just rely purely on this system, we are left with deeply ingrained, absolutely insoluble problems. Things like theft and robbery, dereliction of duty by officials, lack of old age security for the poor, drug use and trafficking, massive class contradictions caused by wealth disparity, family anxieties, huge military spending, and homelessness. The essay insists that without an ideal utopian society, these specific, massive problems literally cannot be solved. So the crucial takeaway here is how we react to that list. The author aggressively questions the reader. Do we honestly think that these insoluble problems should just exist? Have we become so complacent with our best available system that we just accept drug addiction, wealth disparity, and homelessness as permanent, unchangeable fixtures of human life? Do we really believe these problems are fundamentally unsolvable? Let's look at part 4, the proposed solution. Moving from this intense critique to a real-world solution, the author formally introduces something called the second home of Lifechanyuan. And the essay defines this not just as some abstract theory, but as a brand new production and living model. The author claims it is a true utopian mechanism that has been functioning healthily as a real-world experiment for 16 years. According to Shufeng, this community has managed to remain vibrant and full of vitality precisely because it used the failures of past utopias, like Owen's New Harmony community we mentioned earlier, as direct materials for reflection and improvement. The author ends the essay by directly challenging our preconceived notions one last time. Before we easily conclude that utopia is just totally unfeasible and unsustainable, Zufeng asks, are we simply too dogmatic to see a true utopian mechanism? Have we let dystopian fiction and historical missteps completely blind us to the possibility of a truly ideal society? It's a hugely provocative question, and one that forces us to really look in the mirror and think deeply about the kind of future we're actively choosing to build. Something to chew on for sure. Thanks for joining me for this explainer.